I would not give one moment of heaven for all the joy and riches of this world, even if they were to last for thousands and thousands of years.
Welcome to Mission 66, your ultimate journey through all 66 books of the Bible, brought to you by Bible teacher and pastor Dr. Louis Sayao in partnership with Transworld Radio. We know God's Word can change lives, so get ready for some serious discussion as John Matthews and his co-host Esther Sisulu take us through today's study.
Welcome to our program of Bible study, and if you are joining us for the first time, well, I'd encourage you to listen for a while as we'll try to make it worth your while. Well, our journey through the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, continues today, and it brings us to the Old Testament book of Numbers. Now, it was written by Moses, and in this book, we'll see how God wants everything to be done decently and in order. So our teacher, John Matthews, will bring us the theme, a head count.
Esther, thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66, wherever you're joining us from for today's episode. So good to be with you as always. And here we are, journeying now through the book of life that holds the keys and indeed the insight to our eternal futures. We don't say that lightly, but that is the truth. And here we are, reaching the fourth book in the Bible. It's called Numbers, and the book of Numbers is also the fourth book of the five-book Pentateuch. Now, it's called Numbers because it has this name in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And the main theme in the book of Numbers is the presence of God amongst the people of Israel, in spite of their complaining and their disobedience. That despite having been delivered from more than 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Now, the first 10 chapters of Numbers show Moses trying to get the tribes organized and establish the Levites as priests, maintaining the purity of their camps and following God's instructions as they prepared to move toward the promised land. And predictably, there were plenty of problems to tackle, even though God always came through with some miraculous provision just when it was required. So we're going to paraphrase the first 4 chapters of Numbers. Let's go here from verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head. From 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aaron shall list them, company by company. And there shall be with you a man from each tribe, each man being the head of the house of his fathers. And these are the names of the men who shall assist you. Then it lists men chosen to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, each one representing his family. The census was effectively a head count, and they only, notice here, counted males 20 years or older who were able to wield weapons. So this didn't include women, children, or those who weren't able-bodied. And when the tribes were counted and the total added up, it amounted to 603,500 men, 603,550 men to be exact. So if you count women and children, it suggests that the number of people living in the Israel amongst that community in the wilderness at this time was probably more than 1.5, perhaps not even far off 2 million people. And all of the tribes, except for the tribe of Levi, were counted in this census. And the total included all the tribes then except Levi. The reason for that was that the Levites were the tribe of the priests, and they were completely dedicated to the service in the tabernacle, attending to the holy things. They were not to get involved in any fighting. And why is this in the Bible? Well, I think to show how the people of Israel weren't a roving band of outlaws. They were actually being led, counted, structured and organized so that they could continue their journey through the desert, during which they were going to experience God's miraculous provisions yet again. Remember, God authored every word of the Bible, moving faithful men like Moses to write exactly what he wanted. And he didn't waste words. Everything in the Bible means something and is for our instruction. And then in chapter 2 of Numbers, we find how the camp was to be arranged by tribes, each having their own standard. Now, the tabernacle was located in the middle of the camp. That was where the tent of meeting was found with all those sacred objects. North of the tabernacle then were the tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Dan was the largest tribe with about 157,600 men who were able to fight. To the south of the camp, you had the tribes of Reuben and Simeon. They were larger than Gad, with a total of 151,450 men altogether. To the east, you had the tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, Judah being the largest of all, with about 186,400 able men. And then to the west, you had Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Now, Benjamin was the tribe that later on was to become more important and significant than Judah. But out of these, Ephraim was the largest. The total was 108,100 men. So in the end, you have this total of 603,550 men. Now, the census was also accompanied by a military organization, an organization around the camp, which was ordered by God. Each had his place, and they went in and out of camp in their proper marching order. So everything you see was to be done decently and in order. And chapters 3 and 4 then reinforce what we saw earlier. These chapters are actually going to talk about the importance of the Levites and of the priests, of the role that they were to play in that society, tending to everything that was sacred and that belonged to the Lord. Now, I think the main thing amongst all this that we need to pay attention to here is that this is a large nation with what is now becoming a powerful and organized military force with a large population, but still completely and utterly dependent on God. What a lovely place for them to be in. But would they take full advantage of that? Well, look, the Levites, the priests, they figured heavily in the spiritual well-being of the nation. Israel didn't survive just by military might, but because primarily God was with them. And then in chapter 3, we're reminded that Aaron's sons, remember these two, Nadab and Abihu, they died before the Lord when they offered unauthorized fire during one of the ceremonies. So Aaron's remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, served as priests now during Aaron's lifetime. And the Levites were the tribe picked to assist Aaron and his sons. And Levi had 3 sons. Their names were Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. Now their sons and relatives each had specific duties with respect to the maintenance of that tabernacle. And let's just read what they were from verse 25. And the guard duty of the sons of Gershom in the tent of meeting involved the tabernacle, the tent with its covering, the screen for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the hangings of the court, the screen for the door of the court that is around the tabernacle, and the altar and its cords. All the service connected with these. So they were involved in the setting up and taking down of the tabernacle wherever the Israelites moved, which was a fairly significant, involved job. Well, very, in fact. Verse 29, the clans of the sons of Kohath, well, they were to camp on the south side of the tabernacle, with Elizaphan, the son of Uzziel, as chief of the father's house of the clans of the Kohathites, and their guard duty involved the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the vessels of the sanctuary with which the priests minister, and the screen. Now the screen referred to that veil or that curtain that separated the holy place from the most holy place. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, was to be chief over the chiefs of the Levites and to have oversight of those who kept guard over the sanctuary. So the Kohathites reported directly to Eleazar the priest. And the appointed guard duty of the sons of Merari involved the frames of the tabernacle, the bars, the pillars, the bases, and all their accessories, all the service connected with these, also the pillars around the court, with their bases, their pegs, and their cords. In other words, we're talking about the framework of the entire tabernacle whenever it was taken down and then erected in a different place. Chapter 4, then, of Numbers just goes into deeper detail as to the responsibilities of each of the sons of Levi, the Kohathites, who had charge of the most holy things, the Gershomites, who carried the curtains and the tabernacle for taking down, setting up, and when travelling, and the sons of Merari carried and took down and set up the framework of that tabernacle. And at the end, a separate census was taken just for the tribe of Levi. Remember, they weren't included in the first census of all those fighting men in Israel. So then a separate count was made of all the Levites according to their clans and their families, and all the men from 30 to 50 years of age who came to do the work of serving and carrying that tent of meeting. Well, guess what? They numbered 8,580. But that didn't include their wives or their children.
And here on Mission 66, we've now come to the second part of our program, our question and answer period. And right now we are summarizing Numbers chapters 1 through to 4. And John, I just wonder, why do you think that the census was necessary? And what was the significance of all of these numbers? Because there's a lot of numbers here.
Yes. Yeah. In no uncertain terms, realizing why the book is called what it's called, isn't it? Israel didn't normally conduct a census unless they were commanded to by God. Would it have come into their minds? I don't know. I doubt it. But even then, it was to be administered by the priests. Remember King David in 2 Samuel, he tried to conduct a census of his own, possibly out of pride or just wanting to know who was on his side. But it was, in that context, it was considered a sin because it was not called for by God, and the priests weren't consulted. Actually, even David's friend Joab, who was the army commander, knew that the order was, bogus perhaps is too strong a word, but the order hadn't come from God, because he said to David, why are you doing this? And actually, Esther, that one resulted in a severe plague against Israel just because the king had given a wrong order. Different scenario here, because in this case, in Numbers 1, the census is ordered by God. I guess we can only guess as the reason for that. Maybe it gives us reading now an idea of the scope of how many people wandered in the wilderness. If we're talking about 2 million people, well, we would have had no idea it was that amount of people. And so in terms of the deliverance from Egypt and all that had to take place for the children of Israel to reach the promised land, it was miraculous. So maybe without the number, we don't understand the scale of what God achieved through them. So maybe that's the reason. The other thing was they were about to be directed to fight. They were going to have to conquer and possess the land of Canaan. And so there was certainly a usefulness in knowing how many warriors they had at their disposal, perhaps for their own mutual encouragement, that was. The tribes also needed to be organised into fighting units. So I think there's very much an organisational element to this. Very difficult to organise if you don't know what you're organising or how many you're organising. So anyone reading this account as we are now in the future would be able to see and understand the size, the approximate size at least, of the Israelite nation. Now, if we put this into some kind of context, look, we have 8 billion, that's billion people in today's world. But back then, I think the whole known world was around 200 million people. The Roman Empire itself, well, that constituted 60 of that 200 million. So here you have 2 million or so Hebrews. So it might not have seemed like a huge nation, but they were not insignificant either.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they certainly weren't. Do you remember when Joseph's family arrived in Egypt? There was only 70 of them. And now we see that when they left Egypt, they had grown to over 600,000 men. And that's without counting the women and the children. And if you included them, it was over 2 million people. That's a lot of people. But I don't know, where did they all come from so quickly? Because it seems as though it all happened just in a matter of moments, if you will.
Yeah, but historically it didn't. Don't forget, it wasn't actually that quickly, because how long were they in Egypt for? About 430 years. So that is many, many, many generations involved in that, and a lot of generations arise in that amount of time.
So, John, the first census that was taken was a preparation for war, right? But I wonder how they can mix war with the holy things. How could they do that?
Yeah, good question. Well, look, until Jesus returns, as he will, sin coexists, doesn't it, in the same world as faith and holiness. And so ultimately war has come about as a result of sin in the world. Now, it's not sin to go to war. There are circumstances where a sinful world has to reluctantly, as here in the Old Testament, go down this sad path, because there is no way to resolve all situations through diplomacy. And sometimes, that when you're up against the forces of evil, then I think there is something as a righteous war. You've got to be very careful about how you go about defining that. But look, we don't like really to think about war, but it is real life, not life as we would ideally like to have it by any means. Revelation tells us, doesn't it, the book of Revelation, that there is a war even in heaven. So we are going to have war, whether we like it or not. There is an ongoing war in every one of our hearts, in the human heart. We see fights breaking out all the time over what we would perhaps say are silly things, but they point to something deeper. They point, I think, to sin deep in all of our hearts. Now, if there's a war in heaven, then we shouldn't be surprised that things are going to get ugly here on earth as well from time to time. And it doesn't make anyone feel better about it to say that God told the Israelites to go to war, but that's what he did. And yet part of the Israelite nation comprised the Levites for worship, and they weren't to go to war. So this meant that God's people would move forward in battle against enemies, but they would do so under the cover of ongoing prayer.
Okay, so wait, while one group is fighting, there's others on the team who are praying.
Yeah, that's correct. And, there is certainly evidence of that having happened already in history, because you remember in Exodus 17, Moses praying that his people would defeat the Amalekites. And when he stopped praying, then the Amalekites started prevailing. But when he started praying again, then Israel were prevailing. And I think, perhaps if it'll help us understand the issue, the Canaanites, well, that's the land to which they were going, the people who inhabited that land. They were riddled with idolatry and evil practices, and occupying the land that God had previously given to Abraham and his descendants. Now, when God gives you land, you have land. When God gives you a gift, you have a gift. But they were going to have to go there, set their feet on that land, and possess it. Now, God was going to help them. He said elsewhere that he would drive the occupants out with hornets and beasts to make it easier for the Hebrews. But some of those Canaanites clearly were not going to go peaceably. Unfortunately, then that meant that fighting was going to be necessary at some point. And we see, don't we, later in the book of Joshua, spies sent into Canaan. They meet up with a woman called Rahab in Jericho, who tells them that the entire land of Canaan had heard about the Hebrews coming and were quaking in fear of them because they knew that God himself had given the Hebrews that land. And they'd heard about the story of God miraculously delivering them all from Egypt and parting the waters of the Red Sea so they could walk straight through on dry ground. So it was known that these Israelites were on their way to take what God had declared was theirs. And in that story that I referenced, Joshua, well, he won the battle of Jericho because they encircled the city with the priests going before them, leading the singing of praises. And what happened? Well, on the seventh day of marching, the walls of that city, Jericho, they collapsed flat. And following God's instructions, victory is secured. And throughout the Old Testament, we're going to be able to read about Joshua's attempts to conquer the rest of the territory. But also, I think it tells about how their failure to occupy the land entirely was later going to lead to the nation falling into the same kind of idolatry and wickedness that the Canaanites were guilty of. But of course, all in good time, those stories are ahead of us here on Mission 66.
I think I know what you're trying to do here, John, because I see you making this comparison between the war that Israel was going to fight against the Canaanite nations, as well as the spiritual war that we're in today. Am I right?
Well, yeah, look, Revelation describes, doesn't it, a war in heaven between Satan and his evil hordes and God and his holy angels. To us, it doesn't seem like it's possible for God's holy angels to coexist with evil, or that it's possible for such a battle, a war, to take place in heaven. So, if there is war, and there is in the spiritual realm, well, we can be sure that there is war in the natural realm as well. And I believe what we are witnessing today is not one political party arguing with another for power, but we are seeing behind and much deeper than that superficial level, if you want to call it that. What we are seeing is a coordinated assault by the powers of darkness on the forces of God. So God has enemies, and we are at war with God's enemies. Psalm 2 describes how the kings of the earth are united in their efforts to overturn God and his anointed one, that's Jesus Christ. And so this is the conflict of the ages. And it started a long time ago when Satan, who, let's remember, was at one point described as the most beautiful angel in heaven. But he became proud as a result of that beauty, and he lusted after the power and the position of God himself. He now had his sights set on throwing God off his throne. We know what happened. He was thrown out of heaven. Today, those who are in league with the devil are trying to destroy Christianity and indeed all of Jesus' followers. Will they succeed? No. Psalm 2 says God actually laughs at them, saying, I have installed my king on my holy hill Zion. No plot of hell, no scheme of man will ever succeed in overthrowing God, Jesus, or his church. If you read the end of Revelation, the final book in the Bible, at the very end you read how God's angels will throw the devil and his minions into the lake of fire at the very end of time, in terms of time here that we understand it on earth, before eternity in heaven begins. And that is permanent. The devil and his minions into the lake of fire, they'll be there forever and ever. And Jesus said in Matthew chapter 25 that hell was created for the devil and his angels. Unfortunately, man who buys into the devil's program will share that fate. So there is a responsibility on us, isn't there? An urgency to choose wisely when we're deciding whom we're going to serve. It was the great reformer Martin Luther who grasped the incredible beauty of what is on offer for every single human being on the planet today. This isn't a partial offer or just for some. This is for everybody. And Luther grasped the beauty of what's to come in heaven when he said, I would not give one moment of heaven for all the joy and the riches of the world, even if they lasted for thousands and thousands of years.
Praise God. Wow, John, so is there a summary for these 4 chapters that we've read today on Mission 66?
Yeah, let's summarize. Chapter 1 contained, didn't it, the census that was taken of all the tribes of Israel, men from 20 years and older, to determine each one's numerical strength for future combat. And this time the Levites, well, they were exempted from the census, and later Moses counted them separately. Then chapter 2 contained the arrangement of the camp by tribes and the order in which they were to be set out and they would regroup later on. Numbers 3 ordains the sons of Aaron as the chief priests and the Levites as their assistants. The 3 sons of Levi were put in charge of different aspects of the tabernacle, which was to be disassembled, transported, and reassembled in the next location. And then chapter 4 describes those duties in detail for each of the 3 sons, Kohath, Merari, and Gershom. So if everyone does their part, well, the whole church moves forward and moves onward.
Well, that is all we have for you today, dear friend. Thank you for listening. Hey, please share your thoughts with us on today's episode, and also keep up to date on topics for future episodes by following us on Facebook and on Instagram. Simply search Mission 66. Well, as you know, if you join us next time, we will continue our study in the book of Numbers, chapter by chapter. Well, I'm Esther for John and our team saying goodbye and God bless you.
That wraps up today's episode of Mission 66 with John Matthews and Esther Sisulu. Follow their daily teaching by downloading your free study guide at mission66.org. Go deeper into God's Word and discover how each day's teaching can apply to your life. Download your free study guide at mission66.org and have it for our next program. That's also where you can leave a comment or make a donation to continue Mission 66 here and around the world. That's mission66.org. Mission 66 is a ministry of Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.